We're thrilled that you can be here with us today. My name is Lena Arrow, and I'm the Senior Director of Communications here at Overdeck Family Foundation, a national foundation that aims to open doors for every child in the U.S. by measurably enhancing education inside and outside the classroom. Today, we'll share how our foundation and four main portfolio areas are approaching grant making in 2024. Our portfolio leads will provide insight into the biggest challenges they see in today's education landscape and how our grant making has been refreshed to address them. They'll also do deep dives into what they're most excited to fund this year and the opportunities that exist to unlock innovation, evidence, and growth. To learn more about our 2024 portfolio strategy updates, we invite you to read our full blog post. We're dropping a link into the chat now. And now it's my pleasure to bring out your moderator for today's conversation, Anu Malipatil, who leads Overdeck Family Foundation. Anu, over to you.
Thanks so much, Lena. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Before I bring out our panelists, I wanted to remind everyone here today what our foundation focuses on and how it operates. Aligned with our mission of measurably enhancing education inside and outside the classroom, Overdeck Family Foundation funds efforts in the areas of early childhood, hands-on STEM, educator supports, and student-centered learning environments in grades K through 9. Our venture-inspired funding model incorporates funding across direct impact investments, which makes up approximately 75% of our giving, and ecosystem investments, which makes up the remaining 25% of our giving. Our goal with this model is to identify and scale cost-effective and sustainable programs that improve academic and socio-emotional outcomes for all kids. We believe that our grant making encourages innovation, builds evidence, and supports the growth of impactful programs. When making investment decisions, we look for organizations that align with our mission, portfolio strategies, and funding model. We consider 5 main criteria: mission alignment and unmet need, leadership strength, testable theory of impact, potential to scale, and lastly, financial health and sustainability. As you may have seen, last month we published our grant making and impact report, which highlights what our grant making accomplished in the past year and features the wins of the organizations we fund. As we look ahead to this year, our commitment to unlocking innovation, evidence, and growth in education remains, which brings me to the focus of today's conversation. Each year, our team does a review of what we're seeing in the landscape, combined with what we've learned to update our strategies, which is why we're here today. So with that, I'm excited to introduce today's speakers. Joining us today are Emma Banay, who manages our Inspired Minds portfolio. Prior to joining the foundation last year, Emma led STEM initiatives at Expanded Schools, where she forged partnerships with school districts, community-based organizations, and city agencies to deliver high-quality STEM programming. Jessica Fredston-Hermann manages our Exceptional Educators portfolio. Jessica served for more than a decade in New York City's Department of Education, where she directed one of the city's largest professional development programs for educators that supported salary differentials. Pete Lavorini leads our Innovative Schools portfolio. He has experience leading district-level efforts for both New York City and Pittsburgh Public Schools, and has also helped social impact organizations set and operationalize strategy at the Bridgespan Group. Carly Roberts leads our Early Impact portfolio. Prior to joining the foundation almost a decade ago, Carly coordinated comprehensive out-of-school services for children and families in Washington, D.C., and later held consultative roles for school districts, Head Start, and the Robin Hood Foundation. Thanks, Emma, Jessica, Pete, and Carly for being here today. So we're going to kick things off with our 2 in-school portfolios, Jessica and Pete. I'd love for you to introduce your portfolios, your strategy areas for this year, and how, if at all, they differ from last year. So Jessica, let's start with you and the Exceptional Educators portfolio. What's the portfolio focused on for the upcoming year, And how has your strategy shifted? What factors or landscape trends influenced your thinking?
Thank you. It's an honor to kick us off today and to introduce the work of the Exceptional Educators Portfolio, which I began leading almost exactly a year ago this month. Our Exceptional Educators Portfolio remains committed to the vision of more children in K-9 accessing educators who empower them to reach their full potential. So that's really still the North Star for our work. We make investments toward this goal and toward the idea of improving working conditions and support for educators so that our teachers have the time, resources, and capacity that they need to give every student what they need. One shift this year is rather than naming teacher retention as our portfolio's primary goal, we're focusing on teachers' instructional practices and engagement as key levers for improving student outcomes. So that doesn't mean we don't think it's important to retain strong teachers in classrooms. We absolutely do. But we also know a lot of factors impact retention, and we want to prioritize where we can have the most impact with our funding. We're continuing to invest in two of our main strategies from the last few years, strategic school staffing and professional learning that's aligned to high-quality instructional materials, while setting some clearer parameters around what's in and what's out of scope based on what we've learned from the field. So I'll name three learnings that most influenced our strategy in answer to your question. The first is that, this probably won't be surprising to anyone on this call, but we know that schools still face complex challenges coming out of the pandemic. We know students need accelerated, differentiated supports, which then puts increased pressure on our educators to meet every student's need, making a more difficult role even more challenging. As a result, we expanded our professional learning strategy to explicitly include coaching, which we know has a powerful evidence base. And we're also exploring some AI-enabled coaching tools that provide immediate targeted feedback to teachers in order to serve students. As I mentioned, we're continuing to support our curriculum-based professional learning providers who help schools and districts implement high-quality instructional materials. And then in addition to those supports for teachers, we're also trying to address the overall feedback from teachers that the role itself isn't sustainable and that they're being asked to do all things for all students. So we're continuing to invest in our strategic school staffing strategy, which supports organizations that are trying to reimagine the teaching role as more dynamic, more collaborative, and more sustainable. The second learning that influenced strategy shifts came directly from our professional learning partners and our strategic staffing providers, who told us that in order for their work to take root and sustain in schools, they had to prioritize leadership buy-in at all levels. And we see that backed up by research that leadership is the second most important school factor impacting student achievement and other outcomes behind only classroom instruction. So this year, we're including school leaders under that expanded coaching strategy I referenced, specifically to build their abilities to act as instructional coaches and foster strong school-wide learning conditions. And finally, we know families can be critical partners in student success, and we're excited to see research from Learning Heroes and TNTP that found that schools with strong pre-existing family engagement before the pandemic experienced much smaller increases in chronic absenteeism and smaller declines in achievement after the pandemic. So this year, we're piloting a family engagement strategy within the Exceptional Educators Portfolio as well that builds on a lot of the work our colleagues in Early Impact have led, which lets us explore how family involvement can positively impact teacher and student engagement and student outcomes. So lots of things we're excited about this year.
That's great. Thanks, Jessica. Pete, over to you. Tell us about the Innovative Schools portfolio and how it's evolved over the past year and what you're most excited about.
Yeah, I'll say at the front, Anu, that one of the things I'm most excited about is the work that Jess just described with their Exceptional Educators portfolio. I mean, as a former educator myself, I just think the idea of getting more coaching and more training to how to actually better serve my students would have been such a valuable resource. And what's really great about the work we're doing in the Innovative Schools portfolio is aligned to that and really thinking about how the work that the students can do and can also be not just valuable to themselves, but really empower the teachers to get the most impact out of their students. So with that, I'll say, on the surface, our strategy looks very similar to last year. The goal of the Innovative Schools portfolio is to expand access to tech-enabled student-centered learning environments that are intentionally designed for all students to thrive. This year, we remain focused on accelerating math and literacy learning outcomes for students in grades K through 9. And our priority focus areas are going to remain the same with some minor tweaks. So those focus areas are high quality supplemental and core curricula that leverage technology to create personalized learning experience for students and that accelerate mastery of content, innovative approaches, more research, and the scale of high impact tutoring, which we still believe is the most effective way to accelerate student learning that we have available to us. Opportunities to engage students in more active learning where they have more agency, such as project-based learning. And this year, we're looking to add assessment products as a focus area because we believe that changes in technology can lead to more insight into student learning and make it easier and more effective for teachers to respond to student strengths and student challenges. So we'll say what is changing, however, is the market and the landscape in which we're working. And so what we're hoping to accomplish within each of those focus areas is a bit different. So while the pandemic created a surge in demand for new resources, several factors like funding changes and educator fatigue are making it harder for our grantees to grow their impact and reach more students. Advances in AI are creating new opportunities for student-centered learning, as well as new concerns about the role that the technology will play in our students' lives. And then there's changes in funding. The ESSER cliff, declines in venture and philanthropic capital going towards education. It's just harder to raise and secure dollars today than it has been in the past. So these all affect our grantees, and so we're adjusting our approach to finding funding and supporting orgs in 2024 in a couple key ways. So first is how we're changing our approach to thinking about supporting our grantees' growth. We'll help our existing grantees strengthen their offerings through capacity building supports focused on things like product development and implementation strategies. We want to be seeding innovation, like Jess and Irene and our friends of the EE portfolio. We are exploring the potential of generative AI in education while maintaining a focus on evidence-based solutions. Understanding the impact of our grantees and really delve deeper into how, when, and for whom our focus areas have the largest impact on students through new research investments. And then helping prepare for the future. We'll explore sustainable funding models for organizations like all of them, but particularly those for high dosage tutoring that really will extend beyond the pandemic grants.
Thanks so much, Pete. Okay, Jessica, we've seen a ton of energy around staffing models, as you already mentioned, over the past couple of years. And both Pete and Jessica, you talked about how the educator role has just become sort of unsustainable. Tell us why the portfolio is excited about these staffing models, what emerging evidence you're seeing, and what questions you still hope to answer.
Yes, I would love to chat more about this. So our portfolio formally launched a strategic staffing strategy in 2022 in order to fund organizations that are trying to really creatively reimagine the role of the educator in order to better meet students' needs. So the models that we were seeing typically prepare teachers to work in more specialized roles that leverage their expertise. So if you think about the role of an educator as having to, especially in the early grades, know every content area, be experienced in data, in serving students with special needs and multilingual learners, these organizations are really helping teachers find more specialized roles that also give them the opportunity to develop throughout their entire careers. So that includes opportunities for the most effective teachers to extend their reach and coach some newer teachers, as well as for earliest career teachers to learn alongside having more mentors and role models. So along the way, we learned a couple lessons from the initial slate of investments. That includes that staffing flexibly to extend the reach of effective teachers has positive measurable impacts on student learning in multiple content areas and grade levels. We see teacher satisfaction increasing in these models, as well as engagement, and in some cases, even their likelihood to stay in the profession. And we've seen that the work can be cost neutral, and it can actually work creatively within existing school budgets. Since launching the strategy, we've deepened our understanding of the work through a landscape scan that we co-funded with a few other funders, as well as Education First, which outlined the characteristics of strategic school staffing, so helping to create a common definition of what it is, what it looks like, what different models can be for the field, the enabling conditions that support its adoption and scale, and then some of the barriers to this kind of transformational change. And I think Brittany, it looks like, just shared a link to that in the chat. So that's a great place to go to learn more. That scan helped get us excited about a lot of the innovation that we're starting to see in the field, as well as the level of interest from other funders. And one thing I can say I'm personally excited about is that it feels like it has the potential to address a lot of problems, both for the teacher workforce in terms of staffing shortages, not having sufficient growth opportunities, as well as for students whose individual learning needs aren't being met by traditional classrooms. In terms of questions that we're hoping to answer, this year, we're trying to learn more about the facilitators and barriers to high quality implementation of strategic staffing. So what helps it take root? What are the conditions that need to be in place to have the strongest impact on teacher and student outcomes, as well as what gets in the way? What are some of the barriers that make it hard to implement, sustain, and to scale? We hear a lot of demand for these models from teachers and school leaders. So we really want to try to better understand how to codify them, how to launch them, and how to scale as impactfully, cost effectively, and sustainably as we can.
Thanks, Jessica. So back over to you, Pete. One area that you spoke about, which has been widely supported by evidence, is high impact or high dosage tutoring. Curious sort of what factors you think still need to change in order to increase the opportunity for tutoring's impact at scale.
Sure. So high impact tutoring has emerged as a powerful tool for boosting student achievement, particularly coming out of the pandemic and addressing the real tragic amount of academic learning that was lost over those years. But to really unlock the potential of high impact tutoring at the scale in which I think we're all really excited about, we do need to continue to address a few key areas. So first is just that tutoring is too often seen as a nice to have rather than a core instructional strategy. The research tells us that whenever tutoring is integrated seamlessly into the school day, whenever it's part of the school's overall vision, when it's aligned with their curriculum, and there's protected, dedicated time for tutoring to happen, those are all crucial for high impact tutoring to really maximize, to be high impact, to have that highest impact. And that's hard. And I think, unfortunately, I think as schools and districts right now, as they're facing some of those challenges related to funding, my hope is that they pivot to really think about the role that tutoring can play long term as a core instructional strategy. Second is, while the research that we have supports high dosage and high impact tutoring as a whole, we need more specific insights. We need to know much more about which models work best for which students and which student groups under which diverse circumstances. Building this broader evidence base will allow us to tailor tutoring approaches for maximum effectiveness. So again, continuing to move away from that one size fits all approach to something that's much more personal and student centered. We know that high quality tutoring can be expensive. And so we need to continue to explore innovative delivery models, including greater integration with technology to reduce the cost to provide tutoring without compromising the quality of the interaction between the tutor and the student. And finally, we still need more tutors, but it's just not about quantity, right? We need to attract and train and retain qualified individuals who are passionate about supporting student growth and are passionate about building real relationships with students. And this includes developing sustainable career paths for those tutors who may be interested in, getting into some of those staffing models that Jess just talked about. But it also includes more ongoing professional development for opportunities for tutors as they continue to grow in that role. So by addressing all of these challenges, we really hope that we can transform high impact tutoring from a promising intervention to a powerful force for educational equity and student success.
Thanks so much for that, Pete. That's super helpful. So both of these portfolios that you invest in the in-school interventions and experiences that we know that kids have. But you both really approach it from different angles. So we know educators are a critical component to student outcomes and are often required for any innovation to take hold. And I'm curious about the intersection of your work and how each of your portfolios is thinking about the role of AI in teaching and learning. What questions are you grappling with? Pete, why don't you kick us off on this one?
Sure. So what I think you just heard is that Innovative Schools focuses on student-facing tools, and Exceptional Educators prioritizes supporting educators. But both of our portfolios acknowledge the critical role that educators play in ensuring any classroom innovation, such as AI, succeeds in the classroom. So Jessica and I are exploring the potential of AI to enhance teaching and learning in a few ways. First is personalization. So how can generative AI tailor instruction and support to individual needs of students and individual learning styles they may have or interests they may have? The ways in which AI can unlock teacher capacity. So there's tasks like grading and providing feedback that can be automated, and doing so give teachers more time to space to do what they do best. And then we think that AI may have the potential to really empower students. So, by offering more personalized learning pathways and fostering independent learning habits. Uh, but those are all hopes, right? The technology is so new that we have a pretty big learning agenda that we're monitoring, and that this learning agenda really reflects our broader organizational priorities. So questions that we're hoping to begin to answer this year, and expect this to be a very long learning process for us. First is, what is the support that we can offer to our grantees to explore and plan for incorporating AI into our work? The tech is changing rapidly and it's expensive. And so how do we keep our grantees, especially our tech-enabled curriculum providers, stay competitive and leverage AI to accelerate learning in spite of those changes and costs? We're interested in learning more about the emerging opportunities to support prototypes of AI-enabled interventions, and really understanding which of those prototypes are worth investing in. So for instance, while we know that AI is powerful in pattern recognition and data analysis, generative AI tools currently lack human qualities, like the ability to build relationships with students. So really the question is, what are the use cases that we should be developing AI prototypes to address? And then last, what AI research opportunities would meaningfully build insights that advance our foundation and partner strategies to advance student outcomes? We need robust quantitative and qualitative data to determine the extent to which AI can measurably improve student learning, content quality, and learning sequence. So one specific area the IS portfolio is really as excited about is the opportunity to leverage these AI large language models to enhance natural language processing and give more insight into what interactions between tutors and students lead to higher engagement and achievement.
Awesome. I think a lot of the questions that we're talking about are similar across portfolios. Even what you just said about the interactions between tutors and students, we're thinking about that between teachers and students too. So we've been brainstorming on this a lot internally, as well as talking with folks out in the field. And we're excited about the potential for the responsible use of AI to improve the teaching and learning experience for students and educators. We know the field is evolving very quickly, and we are definitely in a learning stance about both the current capability as well as the future potential. But it's been really helpful to talk to our grantees throughout this process about what their needs are related to AI. In some cases, how it can help them make progress toward the core problems that they're already trying to solve, and or help them create more organizational efficiencies so they can operate more cost effectively. As we're thinking about potential AI-related investments for the Exceptional Educators portfolio, a few examples of the questions that we're asking, in addition to those that Pete named: in what ways can AI-enabled tools impact teachers' instructional practices, ideally in service of improved student experience and increased learning? How can we encourage using AI tools that are built on an existing evidence base of what we know about adult and student learning, and that help develop classrooms where students feel a sense of belonging and experience coherent, rigorous instruction every single day? And I double click on that because we know that what's easiest to measure isn't always the most impactful. So we're really trying to drill into what's being captured in these tools, what can we learn from them, and to what extent does that actually change practice and student outcomes in the classroom? And then across the foundation, we're asking questions like, what evidence do we have that these tools are designed to mitigate for bias as much as possible? How were teachers, students, and other stakeholders from diverse backgrounds involved in the design and testing of these products? And how is their feedback incorporated? For our portfolio specifically, we do see an interesting use case with coaching, which I mentioned earlier. We know coaching can improve instructional quality and student outcomes. We also know it's expensive, like tutoring, and it can be difficult to scale. So we're interested in the potential for evidence-based AI-enabled coaching tools to help reach more teachers, as long as they're equitably designed with and for educators, committed to continuous improvement toward the outcomes they're trying to achieve. And we know it's not necessarily replacing a human, but really keeping humans in the loop as a critical part of the learning experience.
That's great. Thank you both. Thank you both for the time. I would love to now turn the conversation over and invite Carly and Emma to join me to talk about our work in the out-of-school context. Hi, Emma, and hi, Carly. So we approach our out-of-school work in two key ways. First, by funding early childhood initiatives for kids ages 0 to 8. And secondly, funding engaging STEM learning opportunities in elementary and middle school. So Carly, why don't we start with you and the Foundation's work in early childhood? What have you seen in the landscape over the past year that's impacted your strategy? Anything that's surprised you?
Thank you. So I've had the real privilege of advancing our grant making in early childhood for the past 9.5 years. And a lot has changed in that time, but we're really remaining steadfast in our goal to measurably increase the likelihood that all children will enter kindergarten ready to learn and experience early school success. We do that by ensuring that all types of early learning environments, home, school, and elsewhere, effectively support children's development. Because many of the challenges and opportunities in the sector have been constant, if not exacerbated, over the last few years, our overall strategy in the portfolio also remains consistent, focused on the adults that have the biggest influence in the early lives of children, families, and early educators. Across these settings, our grantees are encouraging and sparking intentional, high-quality adult-child interactions and relationships, which are known to promote learning outcomes. In last year, a few trends have prompted slight additions to those broad strategy areas. First, expanding access to pre-K continues to attract attention and funding, but there is a growing recognition that simply adding slots isn't enough if they are not high-quality seats. As Jess pointed out, well-trained educators and strong curricula are crucial for positive outcomes. So we're amplifying our focus on professional learning, coaching, and instructional materials. And we know that early educators are critical and often undervalued. And the pandemic has really exacerbated the workforce challenges with a huge surge in educator burnout, often even worse than what we're seeing in the K-12 sector. A second trend is a steep rise in chronic absenteeism. Since the pandemic, the rates of students missing at least 10% of the school year have nearly doubled, from about 15% in the 2018-19 school year up to about 30% in 21-22. This increase is really critical. Chronic absenteeism is a primary cause of low academic achievement, and it starts early. It's particularly true in kindergarten. So to ensure that our little ones aren't missing out on those crucial learning experiences, we're continuing our focus on funding family engagement efforts, both helping families support their child's learning at home and building stronger connections and relationships between home and school. And lastly, child mental health is a growing concern, and we're currently focused on how this shows up in the earliest years. So investing to advance early relational health outcomes for infants and toddlers, while also recognizing that social emotional development for older kids feels more important than ever. And for younger students, we see a connected trend of what's dubbed schoolification, in which very young children's playtime is reduced or even removed in favor of a more narrow focus on academic outcomes. But we know that children learn through play. So this year, we are adding a focus explicitly on play in our grant making to support children's overall well-being.
That's a great overview, Carly. Thank you. So your portfolio has a dual focus on supporting parents as well as improving early learning environments. Curious how you see the relationship between these two, and what role do you see parents and families playing to improve outcomes for our youngest learners?
Yeah, so we believe, like many others, that parents and families really want the best for their children, and that every child deserves to be surrounded by loving, supportive adults who can help them thrive. Because families are such a critical influence for young children, and especially because many kids don't have access to early learning opportunities outside the home, we know that strong relationships in the earliest years with a parent, a caregiver, a family member really lay the foundation for a child's social emotional development and ultimately their future success. At the same time, we know parenting is not always easy. So we fund programs that provide parents and families with the information, the skills, and the support that they need to be effective caregivers and strengthen those bonds with their children, leading to kids who are better prepared to learn and thrive. On the flip side, we believe in the importance of quality early learning environments outside of the home setting. So we support early educators to provide enriching, engaging educational experiences that are also grounded in relationships. And we see the connection between home and school and the partnership between educators and families as a hallmark of a high quality learning environment. So we funded family engagement programs for many years because we have decades of research linking the roles that families play in their child's education and those trusting relationships between educators and home, family, parent, caregivers to later academic and social emotional outcomes for kids.
Thanks, Carly. It's super clear. I appreciate it. So while we're talking about needs outside of the classroom, I'd love to turn it to you, Emma. You've made some updates to the Inspired Minds portfolio strategy to expand the scope to include in-school STEM learning. Can you talk about these shifts in your portfolio's theory about the importance of both in and out of school settings? I'm curious to learn more about the unique role that you see each of these environments playing in STEM learning and how they inform one another.
Sure. Thanks for the question. It's been such a pleasure to get to know the grantees in this portfolio since I stepped into the position 8 months ago, many of whom I see on the call today. And in getting to know the grantees, one of the first things that I noticed is that despite a primary focus on out-of-school time learning in this portfolio, over 80% of our grantees were operating during the school day to some degree. And so to us, this suggested something of a blurry boundary between the in and out of school settings where partners, curricular materials, approaches to learning can actually live in both settings. And at the same time, we know from research from Adam Maltese and other researchers in the space that interest in STEM is sparked and maintained in lots of different settings through different intervention types. And so to create a sort of artificial wall between those two settings wasn't true to what the research tells us. Those experiences can be diffuse, like STEM media, playing math and logic games with family members, hands-on learning experiences outside and inside. But like you mentioned, the in and out of school settings offer really different opportunities and face very different constraints. We know that after school offers a lot of flexibility. It can be a place for innovation and for play. It has a deep commitment to youth development principles, ideas like youth voice, positive relationships with adults, youth agency. But access is a huge issue in out of school time space. Many families can't access care because of limited supply in their neighborhood, cost, transportation, availability. And the school day doesn't suffer those access issues. That's where kids show up all ready to learn and can access science learning. But students on average only get somewhere between 18 and 27 minutes a day in science, or if they're lucky. So on top of that limited time, there's outdated pedagogy that can be actively disengaging when it comes to science learning. So for all of these reasons, we've decided to focus our grant making on the central idea of joy and rigor in STEM learning experiences, and to fund that in out-of-school time primarily, focused really on increasing the supply of out-of-school time STEM experiences in elementary and middle grades when they can have the greatest impact, and that include a range of experiences, things like hands-on learning, games, STEM media, outdoor learning experiences with families. But also fund that idea around joy and rigorous STEM in school too, by scaling interventions like field trips or supports for teachers that connect kids to authentic and relevant STEM learning experiences. And then finally, we wanted to really call out the importance of adults in this out of school time space. Adults are really the facilitator and connector to these experiences in out of school time. So we've built out a new strategy that is focused on expanding the pool of adults with the skills to increase kids to STEM. So in this part of the portfolio, we're looking to increase the overall number of adults. So who's untapped out there who could connect kids to STEM, a librarian, a near peer, young adult mentor, a professional in the STEM fields. And also we seek to develop the skills of all of those adults so that they're able to do that connection work well. So that might be training for educators or supports for caregivers. So it's a little bit about how we're thinking about both of these spaces and the supports and investments needed to make them live up to their potential.
Super clear, Emma. And as a former STEM teacher, a lot of that resonates for me. So for out of school STEM in particular, there can just be such a wide range of learning experiences, as you sort of mentioned in your remarks. How do you think about dosage for out of school time? And do you think that there's like a minimum threshold for it to be effective or meaningful for students?
Yeah, this is a great question. And we think pretty expansively about what counts in this portfolio as an out of school time learning experience, and therefore make investments and have a portfolio that encompasses a wide range of experiences. So currently we fund everything from STEM media, a TV show where an episode might last for about 25 minutes, to a field trip that might last somewhere around 3 hours, all the way up to a weekly club that a student might attend multiple times a week all throughout the academic year. So really varying in that dosage that you mentioned. But one of the ways that we've thought about this question sort of philosophically is to get clear about the idea that kids need a range of experiences to first spark their STEM interest and sense of identity. Second, reinforce, build and maintain that interest, their engagement, the sense of who they are as it relates to STEM. And then third, and particularly in those higher dosage experiences, improve or deepen those things along with the content knowledge and skills that can take longer to develop in those longer duration experiences. So we believe that different dosage types and different experiences might speak better to some of those outcomes than other. So those sort of minimum experience, dosage experience that you mentioned can be really important first tastes that ignite an initial interest, but they can be really hard to measure because they're often short duration. They often happen sort of in the community, at a museum, at a library, watching TV with a family member. And there's some interesting efforts afoot in the field to develop some frameworks to think about how these experiences stack up and map onto each other. And it's a place where we're really interested in learning more at the foundation and are actively looking for research partners to help us learn more. And the very last thing I'll mention is that, as I mentioned earlier, because by their very nature, out of school time programs are opt-in, they can sort of limit that participation. So experimenting with different dosage types and different delivery mechanisms can help ensure that more kids have access to different kinds of experiences. It's not a full solution to the access problem, but it can be part of the solution.
That's really great, Emma. And I really like thinking about sort of each of these experiences sort of having a different potential dosage and threshold. So thanks for that. Before I turn it back to the whole group, one last question for both of you. Both of you mentioned this idea of fun and play as a part of your strategies for engaging children and families this year. Tell us more about the overlap of what you sort of dubbed as joy and rigor, and why it's so critical both in early childhood and STEM learning. Emma, why don't you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, I love this framing of joy and rigor, and it's a phrase that's lived in the foundation for a long time that I was really delighted to sort of lean into in taking this position. So we've really sought to cement that twin idea as a central part of the Inspired Minds portfolio. And to me, I think this framing really leans into the strengths of out of school time learning, which can really excel at creating these joyful spaces for young people. First, because they really center caring relationships between adults and youth, among youth, and centering on these sort of foundational ideas of belonging and safety that can set the stage for deeper learning. And secondly, because they offer opportunities for youth choice and agency in what kids learn, making space for young people to follow their curiosity and express the agency that they have. And then finally, out-of-school time spaces really attend to matters of youth development, like bonding, self-efficacy, positive emotions, engagement, optimism about the future, all conditions for really joyful experiences. And then on the rigor front, we're excited about the additional enrichment opportunities that OST learning experiences can provide, especially as they relate to STEM learning, and especially because they often get squeezed out of the school day. So they make use of a more flexible learning environment to engage in practices and explorations that can't always fit in the school day. So time for kids to do the work of scientists and engineers, to design experiments and carry them out, to ask questions that are important to them. And research shows that that kind of hands-on science learning can boost STEM efficacy and better develop the content knowledge, showing that OST spaces can have a really important role to play as students develop that understanding and their STEM skills through that engaging approach. And we also do believe that that approach is possible during the school day. It faces different constraints, such as limited time for science and the pressures that teachers feel, particularly in this moment, to prioritize literacy and math. So we're excited about grantees who bring that out of school time ethos into the school day and are looking for new grantees who operate in the in-school space and can help us understand more about how that's possible and what it takes.
Thanks, Emma. Carly, would love for you to join in on this conversation.
Thanks. I completely agree with your points, Emma. And so much of what you described is so aligned with what we see in a high quality early learning setting that often gets squeezed out amidst other priorities once kids get to K-12. But just to add a few points on early childhood specifically, when we think about those early years, joy and rigor really go hand in hand. Young children are natural explorers and scientists, and they are endlessly curious about the world around them. They're so eager to learn, but often this spark can dim over time. And we really have the opportunity to build on that natural desire to learn by fostering both joy and rigor. Joy to keep kids engaged and excited, and rigor to make sure that kids are developing the skills they need to tackle challenges and maintain that love of learning over time. As I mentioned in the early impact portfolio, we're adding this focus on play to our grant making strategy this year, because we know that play can have so many benefits in so many forms, whether it's in unstructured free play, adult guided play, even playful instruction. And research tells us that this play-based approach is associated with increased happiness, social emotional development, executive functioning, and gains in academic performance too, all of which are critical components to support early childhood development and lay that foundation for future success.
It's so great. It also just sounds so joyful. So thank you. I will have you and Emma stay on the screen, and I would love to invite Pete and Jessica back into the conversation. So one common thread I heard all of you mention throughout this conversation was the need for better decision making. So just curious to have each of you speak a little bit to how your portfolio is thinking about supporting evidence-informed decision making. And Carly, why don't we go ahead and start with you, and then we'll pass it over to Emma.
Sure. So our work in early childhood is based on a very robust evidence base around the general importance of investing in the early years. But we know it's also important to ensure that individual programs really deeply understand their impact so that they can advocate for the kind of evidence-informed decision-making that you mentioned. So for our direct service partners, we fund sort of in two large buckets. Some organizations that already have strong impact and helping them grow their reach over time and drive those evidence-based decisions at the policy level. And on the flip side, organizations that might already be growing rapidly, but may not fully understand or have the depth of evidence on their impact at scale. At the decision maker level, we try to complement those investments by supporting policymakers to understand both that broad evidence base around the rationale for investing in early childhood overall, as well as particular focus areas such as family engagement, as we mentioned, or even individual programs. And then we're also funding some efforts to improve measurement for the field overall so that policymakers and decision makers can allocate resources to be most impactful for kids. I'll turn it to you, Emma.
Great. We worked with RAND last year to help us understand a little bit more about this question. Actually, how do school and district leaders make decisions about which OST STEM vendors to work with? And one of the things that surprised us in that report was that student engagement, their desire to go to the activity, how much fun they were having, whether or not they came back, that was the number one thing that drove purchasing decisions about out-of-school time STEM providers, more so than cost, more so than evidence of impact. On the one hand, this is fantastic. It's one of out-of-school time's like superpowers that it really attends to youth engagement and joy and the experience that young people have. So it's great to see that that emphasis is reflected in the decision-making behaviors of school and district leaders. On the other hand, I think there is an opportunity for organizations in the out-of-school time space to better measure the impact of their amazing work. One, to know how impactful it is, back to my earlier comments on dosage, what outcomes do these programs mean, at what level, for whom? And to second, demonstrate the impact of OST spaces for driving outcomes that key stakeholders care about, policymakers, families, school and teachers, school leaders and teachers. And then third, to make sure that the most effective programs for those outcomes of interest are the ones that get in front of as many kids as possible so they can do the most good. So that's why one of our priorities this year is encouraging evidence building in the out-of-school time space generally, and working really concretely hand in hand with our grantees to better capture their programmatic impact. That way we can ensure that the types of out-of-school time programs that are available to families and to young people are not only engaging, that's important, but are also effective at increasing those outcomes like student interest, STEM exposure, and STEM knowledge.
Thanks, Emma.
Or-
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to pass it over to you, Jess.
Great. Over to you, Jess.
Love it. So many people to pass the baton. So I'll jump in. With exceptional educators, we think about this in two ways. So first is helping our grantees build out their evidence base, like Emma and Carly referenced, so that their impact can be factored into school and district purchasing decisions. And then the second is supporting some ecosystem work that enables that evidence-based decision-making. The encouraging evidence building has been especially helpful for our curriculum-based professional learning providers, since the market is fragmented and districts have many options for providers. Are you still able to hear me? I see some. Okay, great. Just making sure I saw a face that looked a little bit confused and the sound changed. Great. So for professional learning providers, the market's fragmented and districts have a lot of different options for providers. So encouraging evidence has been really helpful in that market. And we've seen our partners get incredible results that shift teachers' mindsets about high quality curriculum and about the belief that all students are capable of learning the content. So we're continuing to fund research that helps these organizations make a strong case for why they're impactful, cost-effective solutions for schools. At the ecosystem level, we've funded organizations that help provide objective evidence about curriculum materials and professional learning providers. And then we've helped work to create the conditions for more districts to actually use those tools as at least one important data point in their decision-making. Since we funded some data tools in the past and we're exploring some AI coaching tools in the future, we are also interested in how to ensure that ed tech tools are designed from a strong evidence base about the science of learning, and that purchasers are able to identify high quality tools and meet their own and their students' needs. Our colleagues in Innovative Schools have done more direct investing there, so that's probably perfect timing to turn it over to Pete.
Thanks, Jess. So I think that the take that we're taking in Innovative Schools is evidence sometimes isn't enough whenever making these decisions. So we are, to say that we are so excited and heartened by the increased emphasis that states, districts, schools, teachers, parents are really placing on evidence of impact when choosing which interventions to collect, which curriculum to collect, which tutoring provider potentially to work with. And that's great. And we want more of it. We want more evidence that this program's work. We want more tools to help decision makers know about which tools have the most efficacy or not. So I'll do a quick plug for things like the What Works Clearinghouse and the ESSA for Evidence website. Wonderful resources out there that really provide a clear, digestible descriptions of the evidence these different programs have. But the other decision that I think is really critical and what we're learning from our grantees is what then, like the decision to actually use the tools and the decision to actually maximize the intervention in place so that that evidence actually turns into impact for our grantees. And our grantees have told us over and over again that while, just choosing these solutions, choosing them doesn't accomplish student impact on its own. Successful implementation is key. So therefore, in our portfolio, what we're looking to do, in addition to supporting a lot of the same work that the other PM said about developing research and really elevating that evidence, we're really looking to collaborate with our grantees to explore the best practices for implementation and user adoption, anchored on what their research says is the required dosage or usage in order to get maximum impact. So that things like how many minutes in a day, how many days in a week, whatever else is really tied to that impact there. We're working to support our grantees to develop resources that guide educators and school leaders on successful implementation strategies. We're working a lot with Jess and the EE team on this because most of the time that those are things like professional learning services or videos and things like that explain key concepts. Or even technical assistance. Sometimes it's just really hard to figure out how to schedule a day or bring communities on board to actually like make sure that these tools get the impact they need. And so ultimately, what this just boils down to is just that we just understand that the data isn't enough. We're really trying to help our grantees translate these complex research findings into clear and concise language for their customers and partners to really understand. And the hope is that they can really understand the value proposition of each of our grantees, confidently choose the ones that best suit their individual needs, and then do the real work of implementing it well and activating those resources well, so that students can actually get the benefit from all that great evidence or research that we found.
Thanks, Pete. I think you make some really great points here. We actually have an audience question from Helen Westmoreland on this specific topic of evidence. So I thought we could go right there before we go onto some challenges that our nonprofit grantees are facing. So I'll read the question here, which is, I am curious about your theory of change and how our schools and systems move to adopt more evidence-based models across portfolios. More specifically, do you see what's needed as incremental shifts to what these systems are already doing, or more disruptive shifts that require big changes in how these systems operate? And I wonder if anyone has a particular sort of inclination to jump in on this question. I wonder maybe perhaps even if someone in the K-9 might be best suited, just given that that's where we're seeing the sort of most evidence-based adoption happening at the system level.
I'll take a first stab at this. This is
Yeah.
a phenomenal question. Thank you, Helen. I think the shortest answer is it's complicated and it depends. But I do think what we're seeing is it requires both a mix of top down and bottom up demand for this work. So what do I mean by that? So top down, I think what many state leaders in particular, and even the federal government, if you saw the president's State of the Union just last week and his call for more high dosage tutoring, things like that, those organizations have those types of leaders and those types of institutions have a role to play in either mandating or encouraging the adoption of some of these evidence-based products. And so like many states now really think about the role that high quality instructional materials can play. And so mandating things that have that green rating, for instance, from Ed Reports, a big role to play there. But at the same time, so that's the top down. At the same time, the bottoms up part of it is, so again, a former educator, I hated being told what to do, right? It's really hard to come in and have this sort of mandate placed down on us. And so what's really important is that the folks that are developing these interventions or these tools, these products, are solving the educator and the student problems first, right? What is it that those teachers need in order to accelerate learning for their students? What is it that the students need in order to feel like they are valued individuals and not just sort of somebody receiving something in of it? And I think when both of those things happen, when you have sort of the incentives at play to really move towards these new adopting these more evidence tools, and the evidence-based tools are designed with the end user in mind to actually alleviate the challenge they have, that's whenever I think real change is going to happen. And that is not short, that is not easy, but it's something that I think I'm excited to be working towards within the Innovative Schools portfolio for sure.
Thanks, Pete. And I think that's a great place for us to sort of put a stake in the ground about the importance of evidence, and also the challenge of the same challenges appear around implementation and ongoing tracking and ensuring that evidence-based practice can lead to student level impact. So I'm going to keep going and we're going to keep moving on so we have time for some of the other Q&As that pop up. So back to the whole group on this next question, sort of despite all the challenges that we know are facing nonprofits right now, and some of you already spoke to some of those earlier in this conversation, 31 of our grantees increased their reach this last year, and 22 of them increased their earned revenue. So just based on what you all have learned from your grantees in this past year, what do you think is going to continue this momentum in the year ahead? And Carly, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I'll start with one suggestion and know that my colleagues will have many others. But in a tightening fiscal climate, and when educators and families are often stretched thin, many of our grantees who have grown successfully have demonstrated the importance of innovation on their program models. So organizations can essentially make their programs easier to implement, either by modularizing complex models, creating less intensive versions of them, or other shifts that often don't have huge trade-offs in impact, but have a big upside in terms of the ease of implementation. So that's one thing we've seen.
Great, simplicity, love it. Emma.
All right, I'll offer a takeaway from getting to know grantees in my first 8 months here. One thing that we've seen be really effective in the portfolio is when grantees make user feedback and user testing and even co-creation with their primary audience and stakeholders really central to their work. We've seen some grantees be really effective in increasing reach and driving demand when they've co-designed it with members of that audience so that they know it's going to resonate and respond to their authentic needs. And we've seen others be effective by putting a lot of attention sort of at that product development stage, really ensuring that they've met needs of their stakeholders. And I think that sometimes these ideas get presented as like an either or, a little bit of a false dichotomy, like either you're really attending to a local context or a particular audience, or you're scaling and trying to reach everybody. And I think our grantees' experiences drive home the idea that scale and this kind of contextualization don't have to be mutually exclusive, that if you really attend to what people want and make that a part of your product development process, you can do that in service of reaching more people in service of scale. So I think our grantees who've really unlocked how to do those two things together have had a lot of experience, successful experience with growth this year.
Great addition, Emma. Jess, tell us what you got.
Yeah, I'll start by +1ing everything that's been shared. There's a lot of brilliance and thoughtfulness in this space and in the chat as well. For our portfolio, we've noticed the organizations that thrive tend to have two qualities in common. So they walk the walk of building networks and relationships with the people that they're trying to serve, a lot like Emma was describing, and then they're able to clearly demonstrate impact on the measures that are most important for those people. So in practice, that means they usually have individuals or teams who are focused on building relationships with their primary stakeholders, both because it helps develop that feedback loop to ensure products are responsive to their users, and because it helps drive sales once they've established that they can provide value to their users. As an example, 2 of our grantees who expanded their reach and revenue were able to meet a surge in demand because First, they'd already established networks, either in or connected to the districts that were seeking support. They had strong evidence of impact on student outcomes based on metrics that really matter to the district and school leaders who are trying to make a quick decision in the middle of a lot else going on. And they'd built staffing structures that enabled them to hire and shift resources around to meet demand, which they realized was necessary for them to do because they were learning from stakeholders. So we see the feedback loop working in both directions, and then that developing and publicizing evidence of impact and learning is critical.
Thanks, Jess. Pete, close us out on this one.
Well, just again, plus 100 to everything that Emma, Carly, and Jess said. Two places I might just add. So the first, I think, is that it's really critical for our partners to demonstrate their impact and return on the investment that schools and districts and states are making in these things. There is pressure. The dollars are precious. The time in the day is precious. The ability to sort of figure out how to change people's minds to engage it is really precious. So as much as possible to just demonstrate that ROI is critical. And I think what helps in doing that is what folks have named too, which is building the relationships to show that, this takes time, it takes energy, but actually, if you do what needs to be done, the impact is there. And the second I'll say is at a little bit of a higher level, as I mentioned earlier, there's some real headwinds facing our grantees and folks that are trying to do great things for kids right now. And so I think partnerships are going to be really critical to sort of help continue to make the case that it's worth staying within the fight, keeping on the journey towards academic recovery, keeping on the journey towards re-envisioning what school can look like for students and the teaching experience can look like. And that just, no one organization can do that on their own. And so really working with others to create a vision and work together towards that, I think is going to be really important in the years ahead.
Thanks, Pete. Okay, I'm going to fold in an audience question here, which I think is really relevant for this conversation that we're having. So it's a really open question for anyone who feels like they can jump in on this one. Can you provide more context around successful revenue models with current grantees? So maybe even if anyone has a grantee in mind, maybe anonymously, just sort of what is the revenue model, what works about it, and yeah, what's the relevant context that folks need to know? Anyone have anything top of mind they want to share on this topic?
I feel like I've been talking so much, Anu, but I have some ideas. But look to my friends here. Anybody else want to go first? No? Okay, all right. So, of course, the answer is it depends. And for many of our grantees, what I think they found is as they start in one market and really understand the value that they can provide to districts and educators around, providing, for instance, a supplemental curriculum tool, they're then really able to sort of, and once they've delivered on that particular tool, they found that there are ways to sort of generate more revenue by building outwards and finding new products to further enhance what's happening within the classroom, either or within that one-on-one, within that whatever initial product or business that is. So, a lot of my organizations are now moving into providing training or providing after-school products and not just in-school products. And I think that's great for us because we also sort of see it further encourages more coherent learning experiences, which I think are really critical. And Emma, you came off mute, so please save me here.
I was just going to jump in with a perspective from the out of school time portfolio, because I think your point, Pete, of course, there's it depends by organization, and then it also has real differences by landscape or market. So one of the things that we think about in the after or the sort of out of school time space is around sort of who the buyer is for the service and paying attention to trends based on who that purchaser is. So some organizations are working directly with schools and with districts as the purchaser so that kids can attend for free and those costs don't roll on to families. Other grantees are thinking about how to leverage corporate dollars, given the really large presence of STEM corporations. How can we motivate and understand their interest in supporting the next generation of STEM interested young people and folding that into their revenue model? excuse me. And then also thinking more broadly about sort of diversification being the name of the game. How can grantees think about multiple sources of revenue that support the work they want to do, give them the runway and the predictability they need to be able to plan and innovate and grow, and making changes based on sector and individual program model and approach to help them identify the right fit for that. And it's a place where we learn from our grantees, and we also offer capacity building to help them get more insight around that for longer term financial sustainability.
That's great. I love that we both have an example from the in-school context and the out-of-school context. That's great. And then you can tell there's even some differences in how that plays out. So thank you both. Okay, we're gonna do a little lightning round. And so I'm gonna ask in a sentence, can you share what you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges for nonprofit leaders in 2024? Emma, kick us off.
I'm so thrilled to get to go first for this one, because I'm going to take the obvious answer on the challenge and say navigating the school funding climate is going to be really challenging. ESSER extensions, the cliff is on the horizon. After school and summer really experienced notable growth, and like we're seeing them be some of the early items on the chopping block. And so advocates will really need to rally to keep priority there. I think that also speaks to the opportunity of this moment for the out-of-school time field broadly. The opportunity is, how do we maintain that focus on out-of-school and summer and the important role they play, and weekends and other times they count as out-of-school time? And how do they attend to the unique challenges of this moment? I think being part of the solution to chronic absenteeism, for example, is a huge opportunity for the out-of-school time space that can play to engagement and family connection. So a link to opportunity and challenge there.
That's great. Jess, what you got?
So in terms of opportunity, I've been thinking a lot about space to collaborate in the field, especially by even thinking creatively about who we're collaborating with. So for us, that was why we decided to explore including school leaders and families in our strategy, while still focusing on how they can support teachers. So really thinking a little bit more broadly about collaboration. And then in terms of challenges, I'll echo something I heard from grantees and I saw pop up in the chat earlier too, which is folks feeling like they're already behind on understanding and using artificial intelligence. So I will just say, if everyone feels that way, you probably are not behind, but we are in a world that is going to require figuring it out together in terms of how to leverage technology in service of greater impact and efficiency, while not getting distracted from the critical core work that we do every day. So know that we are learners alongside you and believe that you're up for the challenge.
That's great. Pete.
I will take the opposite side of the coin, pun intended, to what Emma shared, and say I think a big challenge that our grantees are facing and nonprofits generally facing is that philanthropic funding is becoming more and more challenging to secure. And it's that funding that enables innovation, evidence, and investing for works of scale. And so I'm really proud of the work that OFF does too, in the way in which we sort of deploy our philanthropic capital to support those things. And I really hope that other funders are willing to take some swings in that space as well. And then as an opportunity, I'll take the opposite side of the coin to what Jess says. I'm actually really, again, it's new technology, it's new. It's hard to know the impact of it, but I do think that the AI may provide nonprofit leaders with opportunities, especially those who sort of are in the ed tech space, to reduce costs to deliver this work. And again, not replacing teachers, not replacing individuals, but it's really hard to find engineering talent for nonprofits and really in general. And I'm wondering and excited about potentially the role that AI can play for things like simple programming or even maybe more difficult programming tasks that reduce the amount of engineers that they may need to have on staff.
Thanks, Pete. Carly.
Great inputs from my colleagues. One thing I didn't hear yet is we're in an election year, and the politics surrounding education will continue to be a challenge and often a distraction from students' learning. But the opportunity there is that I'm hopeful that the education sector really has a chance to become a unifying force in this divisive landscape by focusing really concretely on improving outcomes for kids, whether that's using clear evidence to kind of rise above the rhetoric or amplifying the voices of educators and students to ensure that those policy discussions are informed by the real world experiences in our schools. That's my hope and opportunity for the year to come.
Thanks. Yeah, that is definitely, I know, on everyone's mind. So very relevant and timely. Thanks, Carly. Okay, so we're going to take a few questions from the audience. There's plenty here. I don't know if we'll have time to get to all of them, so we'll do the best we can. And we'll go ahead and dig right in. So first question is really meant for anyone. We've received a lot of questions about family engagement in this conversation. So curious how each of you are thinking about the role of families and caregivers in your grant making strategies this year. And is it any different than in years past? So maybe I'll have Carly, I see you off mute. So why don't you jump in on this one first, and then happy to have others jump in.
Sure. So this is an easy one for me because families have really been at the center of what we've been funding in our early childhood work since I started here. But I think the shifts that we're thinking about are really recognizing just the interconnected nature of all of the adults that are supporting young learners, and setting up those relationships to be trusting and supportive from the start. As kids enter school, often earlier now that pre-K is expanding, making sure that parents feel welcome in the school, making sure that teachers see parents as assets and not obstacles, and really thinking about how to kind of create this ecosystem around a child that can help them do their best. But I know there have been some bigger shifts in other portfolios. So
yes, I love that it's been a core tenet of that portfolio for quite some time. Pete, Jess, or Emma?
Yeah, I could jump in here. So I mentioned earlier within Exceptional Educators, we're thinking about building on all the amazing work that our colleagues in Early Impact have done to be more intentional about supporting some family engagement work across the K-9 spectrum, because we know that families matter at all levels of students' education. So the way that we've started thinking about it, and again, naming it's new for us in this portfolio this year, we know that there's many different roles that parents can play in supporting students. And we think about the possibilities of parents as partners and strengthening the homeschool connection, as well as parents as teachers and really engaging and playing a more active role in children's education. And so for our portfolio, we're starting out thinking more about parents as partners, knowing that we are the portfolio of exceptional educators. So we're really thinking about how to support teachers in doing their core work of supporting students. And we're thinking about a couple of different ways of strengthening homeschool connections. So that could look like engaging parents as partners with classroom teachers to build more transparency and trust. That could look like improving forms of homeschool communications, forms of coaching, PL supports for teachers and potentially school leaders as part of the building a school-wide coherent family engagement strategy. We've also talked about looking at research that helps us understand which family engagement practices are most supportive of student success and in what context. So we're really trying to be responsive to what we've learned from our work within Early Impact, but then building on how to engage families at all levels to work with teachers and school-based staff in service of student success.
That's great. Thanks, Jess. Emma, I'm going to ask you to jump in on this one. And Pete, I'll ask you to hold because there's a question for you coming up. So Emma, I know families, parents, caregivers are central to a lot of the work in the out-of-school space. So tell us sort of how it's showing up in your strategy and grant making.
Absolutely. I think we're a nice counterpoint to Jess's explanation of the sort of parents as partners idea. And in the IM portfolio, often we're thinking about parents as teachers as one of the earliest introductions to STEM learning in the home, in the community, and beyond. And so we work with a number of grantees who are thinking about supports for caregivers, both around their own mindsets and beliefs about STEM content, their sense of self-efficacy and confidence and content knowledge to be able to create those kinds of in-home and in-community learning experiences, as well as the content knowledge and sort of pedagogical approach to be able to do that effectively without passing on math anxiety, for example, and by championing some of the outcomes that we know can be supportive of STEM interest in the long term. So leaning in on that sort of second part of the strategy and in partnership with grantees who thought about how to create that space for learning for parents themselves to be able to be that teacher most effectively.
Yeah, I love that phrase, for parents as teachers. I think, as many of you mentioned, there are many adults in a child's life who can play the role of mentor, teacher, and guide. So I appreciate that. Okay, we're going to switch gears to the next question here. And I think many of you might see a poll. I'm going to let you all go ahead and answer those questions while we keep moving on with Q&A. So this question is for Jess and Pete. And Jess, I might have you jump in first, and then Pete as a follow-on. So there's a couple questions here about AI-driven tools in K9. So the question specifically is, would you please talk more about what you and other experts are seeing in that space, especially for how AI can work for coaching? And there's sort of a sub point here. If the idea is that tools will give teachers more time to build healthy relationships with students, don't we need to also make sure teachers are equipped to do so? So Jess, I'll pop this over to you first.
Sure. So there's a lot in there. I'll share sort of what's top of mind, and then I'm sure Pete has other ideas here as well. So what we've seen so far is that most of the current and or tools that are in development in the teacher space are focused on either impact or efficiency. So when I say impact, that's more about helping teachers get better at their core work. So that's a lot of the coaching tools that we see, giving feedback on things like wait time, the kinds of questions they're asking, how many questions they're asking, how often they call on each student, sort of starting to measure some aspects that are related to teachers' core instructional practices. And then the second bucket of tools are related to efficiency. So that's more what I think the second question is getting at, which is how do we help teachers save time from doing some of the tasks that we know take up a lot of time? And here I've seen everything from tools that help design lesson plans, create assessments, translate into multiple languages, help create family school communications, IEPs. It really runs the gamut of all kinds of tasks that teachers are asked to do in service of students. One thing I'll name here, and when we thought about where we could be most impactful, that influenced our decision-making, is that just because a tool exists and saves time doesn't always mean that it's going to do it in a way that is better for the teacher, for the family, or for the student. And so one thing we're looking at, for example, when we play around with some of the tools for generating lesson plans are, is this actually standards aligned? Is this actually built on high quality instructional materials? It might save time for a teacher, but is it actually going to save time if it's not delivering higher quality instruction for the student that is helping them reach their learning goals? So that's something that we've kept in mind in looking at investments across both spheres. I think there was a second part of the question that I might have missed, but I'll just name for us, that's part of why we decided to focus on tools related to impact, at least to start in the coaching space, and both trying to better understand what I referenced earlier of like what's currently easiest to measure, what are the technology that we currently exist, what is that able to do? And then when we think, pie in the sky, what do we hope that AI can support in making coaching more scalable? What are some of the other evidence-based practices that might take time, might take financial resources like Pete referenced, but that AI could really help alongside coaches and alongside teachers, help drive towards more use of those research-based practices in classrooms.
That's great. Thanks, Jess. Anything you'd add here, Pete?
I think it's just important when we talk about AI, just to think that we're so early and on in it. And even like the use cases that we're seeing, we're still trying to figure out how, to Jess's point, how impactful they're actually going to be. There's a lot of making existing ways of learning maybe faster, maybe more efficient, but we don't know. And I think I'm really excited to learn more about in the years to come about what are those challenges related to learning that AI it really just totally blows up the door for us, right? How does this really get to help us move away from the the more industrial model of education to really one that's more student learning? And I'm not sure if we're there yet, but I have confidence that there's a lot of really smart, really bright people, including a lot of teachers and educators that are thinking about this already. So it's a place that we're excited to be learning from.
Yeah, definitely early and some promise, but a lot more effort and work needed. So I appreciate you naming that. So Pete, one question here for you, just around, there's several questions in the Q&A around assessments. So I wonder if you can just build a little bit more on what you're looking for and what you hope to assess from a student or teacher perspective, and how that might be different from how things work in the classroom already or
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thank you for this question. I'll say, so going back to my time in the classroom, I remember when I gave these assessments, and we're spending so much time either on the state assessments or the district assessments, or even, going back to just sort of the quiz I give in my classroom. There was so much time we were spending assessing students, and the value of those assessments were so limited, right? They basically could tell us, did a kid understand a standard or not? It didn't tell us anything about why they may have misunderstood the standard or what they need to learn next. It didn't necessarily tell us what we should be doing to address whatever that misunderstanding is. Um, and the assessments were only for me as a teacher. They never interacted back to the student to encourage them or to give them insight into what they were doing. And so what is really exciting, I think, about the generative AI, some of the other technological advances, is that doesn't necessarily have to be the way in which assessments work anymore. We have enough data to actually really understand. You answer a question wrong, what might some of the misconceptions be? And we have enough data now to potentially link that to interventions and professional learning that a teacher can take up to go from there. And so it really does. This is why I'm so excited about these products and these hand systems. It really does help us move away from this 1 to 35 model, right? Or 1 to 30 model, how big, depending on how big your classroom is. Of I took an assessment and 30% of my kids didn't get something right, so I'm going to teach that, and move much more towards I have a classroom of 30 individual, unique people with unique assets, unique misconceptions, and these are tools that can help me understand where they are, where we need to meet them, to make them progress and feel empowered in their work.
Yeah, that's great, Pete. I'm going to move us along just to see if I think we have time probably for 2 or 3 more questions. And on this one, I'll direct to Emma and Carly. And then if others have additional thoughts, we'll invite you to jump in. So how do you see socio-emotional skills factoring into your funding strategies? And what are some examples of grantees that build these skills for students?
Yeah, this is a really important part of the theory of change for the Inspired Minds portfolio, and what we think the promise of experiences and out of school time can deliver. So in this portfolio, typically grantees are aligning to some part of our theory of changes to priority outcomes. And those include attitudinal outcomes, so things like interest, identity, sense of belonging. They include sort of academic skills and behaviors. And then they also include student SEL skills and competencies. So we often see grantees who are really working towards and trying to understand the impact programs have around perseverance, relationship building and collaboration skills, self-efficacy, sort of academic engagement skills. The kinds of competencies that I think the hands-on, project-based, often team-focused learning experiences in STEM in particular are really well positioned to help kids practice and develop and try again, because they're hard to learn and take reinforcement and lots of sort of creative, low-stakes environments to try out and practice.
Yeah, super helpful, Emma. Thank you. Carly, jump in.
Yeah, I think I'm often a bit of a broken record about SEL. These are just really critical areas, especially for young kids. So we think about this a bit on a spectrum by age. So when we're thinking about infants and toddlers, it's really grounded in the concept of early relational health, which is essentially the developing capacity to form secure relationships, to experience and manage a full range of emotions and feel supported in doing so. As kids get older, things like executive functioning become really essential, emotional regulation, the ability to exist in a group with other kids in a classroom, and essentially learning to be able to learn in the school setting. Those are sort of the baselines, but of course we're looking at when kids are struggling, how we can help intervene across the board for both educators and families.
Yeah, wonderful. I agree with that point that sort of this is on a continuum, and for kids at different ages, there's sort of different components of SEL to pay attention to. Great. Okay, so one question for all of you, and then I think we'll be just ready to close out. So what are some best practices you might recommend for measuring and or communicating impact? I know it's different for each of you in different contexts and different portfolios. So would love maybe a lightning round on this one could be good.
I can start. I think grounding your understanding of impact in a clear theory of change is really essential, so that you can understand each step of the way, whether you're impacting the outcomes that you hope to change. And measuring an outcome that actually your program is not well positioned to change isn't going to be helpful. That sounds obvious, but I think it's often, it takes that real clarity of the theory of change to get a measurement and evaluation plan in place. And then communicating impact in a way that's really clear and grounded in something that's meaningful for kids or for educators or whoever your beneficiary is. In addition to the quantitative rigor that we'd hope to see in that communication, we also just want to understand why it's important and why it means something for them.
Thanks, Carly. Go ahead, Emma.
I'll give the foundation's research strategy a shout out. You can read more about that on our website. But one of the things that's really central to that approach is really seeing evidence building as a continuum with lots of opportunities for organizations to think about the right design at the right moment for their organization's capacity, existing evidence base, and desire for the future in terms of evidence building. So I think a best practice is to understand where you are along that continuum and make intentional moves to build up data infrastructure, internal capacity to move along it.
Just add on that one of the things that's impressed me with some of our professional learning providers and folks doing the strategic staffing work is the extent to which they understand some of the changes that we are trying to see take time to get to the ultimate outcome that we're trying to change, which are better outcomes for kids. But that doesn't mean that we can't still be testing, measuring, and collecting data along the way, especially when there's a really clear theory of change, like Carly referenced. And so we see folks that from the very beginning, they're starting to collect evidence of mindsets before and after they're doing their work, of practices that are in use before and after doing their work, and sort of developing all of these intermediate measures that help them understand, are they having the intended impact? And is this helping them move along the logic model or the theory of change that they've developed towards the outcomes that they're trying to see? So I think that's something that's really helped our grantees of being strategic around, we're putting this in place, we're measuring, we're testing, we're learning along the way, and then we're understanding how to communicate impact when we're able to impact the ultimate outcomes we want to change.
Thanks, Jess. Pete, you can give us a few words.
Make not all students are the same, so being able to measure and communicate your impact on the diverse set of students that you're serving is important for learning. It's important for the work that we do in terms of really making sure that all students have the opportunity to learn, and all means all. And it is something we are more than happy to help you do if you are struggling with figuring out how to actually collect and disaggregate data for your students and your impact that way.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate that. Okay, Emma, Jessica, Pete, and Carly, thank you so much for this thoughtful discussion. It really has just been so great to hear how you're thinking about the year ahead. And I know I'm just so excited and thrilled to see what we learn as this year progresses. And to everyone, thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions about today's conversation, or if you'd like to follow up, here's the contact information for each of our portfolios. And lastly, I saw many questions in the chat on this. An email with today's webinar recording and this contact information will be sent to all who registered. If you'd like to stay in touch with the foundation and its news, you can find us on our website, sign up for our newsletter, or follow us on LinkedIn. And with that, we will conclude today's webinar. Take care, everyone.